Great. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us for tonight's Fright Night. Tonight's program is entitled Poltergeists, Bridgeport, and Ed and Lorraine Warren. And tonight's guest speaker is Paul Eno. We're joined tonight by paranormal investigator and author Paul Eno for a discussion of his latest book, Dancing Past the Graveyard, Poltergeists, Parasites, Parallel Worlds, and God. From battles with demons to people trapped in parallel worlds, get ready to have your existence rocked as you learn about the multiverse, ghosts from elsewhere, and neighbors who don't yet have names. But Paul's presentation will focus primarily on the famous Bridgeport poltergeists of 1974 and his work alongside Ed and Lorraine Warren, the Bridgeport natives and paranormal investigators famous for their involvement in the Amityville horror case. Paul is one of the first paranormal investigators of the early 1970s. He's an award-winning journalist, and he's the author of 9 paranormal books, and he's at work on his 10th. Paul, along with his son Ben, has hosted Behind the Paranormal, a Boston and Providence-based popular radio show for more than a decade. So all of us here watching live on Zoom and those that will watch on demand, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Paul for joining us here tonight. And Paul, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Robert. Welcome, everyone. Poltergeist is kind of a spooky word, isn't it? Well, it's a German word. Essentially, it's a compound word that means a spirit that thrashes about or a noisy spirit. Now, most of us have gotten their ideas about poltergeist and the paranormal in general from Hollywood. And of course, Hollywood is not science, it's entertainment, nor have these people, I think, ever actually experienced a poltergeist. This, of course, is from the movie Poltergeist, 1982. Now, I'm tempted here to say, seriously? But actually, you'll find in a little while when I talk about the Bridgeport case that something kind of like this actually happened. Now, let's go back to the 1600s. And it's interesting that Robert was just talking about the Salem witch trials, most of which actually took place in Danvers. In Hartford, Connecticut, there was a witch scare and a witch hysteria long before that. It was in the 1640s to the 1660s. And oddly enough, here is the Founders Monument in Hartford. Maybe you'll recognize the Travelers Insurance Building there. There are 161 names on it, including one, Nicholas Disbrow, who lived from 1612 to 1683. And he is my, if you stick 9 greats before the grandfather, he's my direct ancestor. And this sort of thing, I guess, must run in the family because his situation was that he was the victim, if you want to say, of the first recorded poltergeist experience in North America by the Europeans in that period. And the natives, of course, would talk about such things. But when the Europeans settled in New England, he was the first guy, my ancestor, to experience a poltergeist situation. And apparently what happened, of course, was just that he would be, this is where he lived. He lived in this vicinity right there where that big arrow is, what's now Albany Avenue in Hartford. And he had rocks coming down his chimney, hitting him. It would hit people in the street. People would hear strange voices and strange noises. And poor old Nicholas was accused of witchcraft. Okay. Now, he never actually was tried or anything, but he was sort of victim of circumstances. The demons were after him and that sort of thing. So that's but he did escape that. But also his there were phenomena going on for his daughter as well, who moved to a different part of Connecticut. So this sort of thing is not new. Now, excuse me, the generally understood party line on poltergeist is right here. Now, it's been a long time since I believed really any of this, at least the way most people believe it. Now, starting in 1971, I'll go back to that, How I Met the Warrens and that sort of thing. I questioned everything. I was a real pain in the neck in the seminary. I questioned everything. And, I would ask questions like, okay, the Bible says Christ died on a Friday and was in the tomb 3 days. Well, Friday evening to Sunday dawn is not 3 days. It's like a day and a half. No, it's not important. But that's the sort I used to drive them nuts. Finally, they didn't like my paranormal work. So 1977, about a year before ordination, they threw me the heck out. So maybe the church and I had a lucky escape. I don't know. But anyway, you can see here, poltergeists are ghosts that are emotionally stressed. I don't think so. They make strange noises, knocking sounds. I'm not sure if it's them doing it. We'll get into that. They move items, slam doors, and smash things on the ground. That all happens. I've seen it, but whether it's actually them doing it deliberately, I don't know. Well, maybe I do. Usually the disturbances last for 2 to 6 weeks. There have been cases that have lasted for decades. Some people believe poltergeists are caused by the subconscious. Well, yes and no. Now, one of the things that the Poltergeist movies got right, and I think that there were, 3 sequels, and they got dumber as they went, with a few exceptions. I don't know if you remember the first movie, but here is the psychic who came in and said, "It knows what scares you." That's true. So let's get into the house on Lindley Street, Bridgeport, Connecticut, November 1974. This is something, if you were of my vintage, you might remember from the newspapers, you might remember from radio and TV. It had tremendous news coverage because Ed and Lorraine Warren called in the press. And I'll tell you how I got involved with it. But it was the subject of a 2014 book. And it kind of died away. I wrote about it in Fate magazine in the 1980s, and then in a book in 1998, and then an expanded story. Actually, the book that our good host named does not have this story in it. The Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know Is Wrong, 2016 has the story in it, if you were interested in pursuing it further. But believe it or not, that's me. I was studying for the priesthood. I entered the seminary at the age of 14 in 1967, when you could still do that. And in I'll give you here's the first case I ever indulged in the field, 1970, 1972, Bridgeport, I shouldn't say Putnam, near Putnam, Pomfret, Connecticut, in an area that was known as locally as the Village of Voices. Now, that case is in the same book as the Bridgeport one, and you can read about it if you like. But believe it or not, that's me on the right holding the book. And on the left is an example of what we encountered there. It looks like a baby kind of lying in a tree. And I was able to find in a book of local history, years after this picture was taken, that people would not go to this cemetery at night because of, quote, ghosts seen reclining in the branches of a certain elm tree. So we were seeing things apparently that people were seeing in the 1700s. But Ed and Lorraine Warren, Lorraine particularly, I had a theory that ghosts, what were known as earthbound spirits, were actually souls in purgatory. Now, any good Catholic kid would know about purgatory. It's, if you're not quite bad enough to go to hell, not quite good enough to go to heaven, you go to purgatory to be purged, hence the name, and then zip, off you go to heaven. And it also satisfies sort of this Western mania for pigeonholing everything and limiting it to our narrow understanding of time. But nevertheless, that was my theory. So I wrote something about this, and Lorraine Warren read it, and she thought that was a fabulous idea. So early in 1972, she invited me down to their house in Monroe, Connecticut. You got to love their license plate there on the car. And she and Ed had me to dinner, and Lorraine, tremendous cook, just wonderful. And that's how I got to know them. And as time went by, they would sort of pass off cases to me that Ed didn't have time for or wasn't interested in. And the seminary authorities were not pleased with this. And I had done it's sort of an obscure thing to most people, but I had left the Roman Catholic Church and become Eastern Orthodox, and had graduated from the two Catholic seminaries at different academic levels, and had gone on to St. Vladimir's in New York. St. Vladimir Seminary, was studying for their priesthood in the graduate level theology program. And that's when I was pretty much most active with the Warrens up until about 1978. So that's Ed and Lorraine in the center. And on the right is Father William Charbonneau, Roman Catholic priest of the Archdiocese of Hartford. And on November 24th, 1974, I was home from the seminary. I was in Wadhams Hall Seminary, college level, in Ogdensburg, New York, which provided some interesting stories from my last book about exorcisms I was assisting at. And I was going to go down to have dinner with them. I didn't know anything about a case that was brewing. And of course, these are the days before cell phones and all this sort of thing. So you got in the car and you didn't know anything until you got where you were going. So I pull up to their house. It was in the woods on a cul-de-sac, and Lorraine comes flying out the door and says, "Are you in a high spiritual state right now?" And the fact was, I was in a terrible spiritual state because of this decision to join the Orthodox Church, which I hadn't told them about. So I said, "Yeah, I'm fine. Let's go." And Father Bill went down with Lorraine, and I went down with Ed, and he explained what was going on here at this house in Bridgeport, Connecticut, on Lindley Street. Now, here's an official police report, just one of many, from Patrolman Joseph Tomek, with whom I'm still in touch. He's in his 80s and retired in Florida right now. And this describes a number of events that occurred in the presence of police officers and firefighters that we would certainly describe as poltergeist activity. Now, a poltergeist case begins slowly. You don't just have something, starts throwing your dining room table upside down. It always starts, and I found out, and I think I can answer why this happens, but it starts out very slowly. You have a few knocks. You have a few feelings of presences, things that make you fearful, angry, annoyed, and that will, in fact, feed this thing and make it stronger. And this is apparently what had happened. The previous day, November 23rd, the family had driven to New York City, which was about 60 miles away from Bridgeport, to go shopping, which they often did. And when they came back, the little girl Marcy's television was on her bed. Now, the family consisted of an older couple, well, in their 40s, older to have a child 10 years old, and an adopted daughter, Marcy, who had come from the Iroquois Nation in Ontario, Canada. And that was it, in a very, very tiny house. So as you can see here, the officer is saying Mr. Gooden stated that approximately 9 p.m. on the 22nd, someone started banging on the outside. Again, the walls were knocking. They actually had recordings of this. I'll go to the next page. You can see what the officers themselves saw. Joseph Tomek, Carl Leonzi, George Wilson, and Leroy Lawson observed one or more of the following happen. The refrigerator rise approximately 6 inches off the floor. I saw that myself because that happened several times. I saw that in the presence of police officers and firefighters. A 21-inch portable TV set in the living room rise off a table and turn around. Furniture move away from the wall and fall over. Objects on shelves and hanging from the wall start vibrating and fall to the floor. At no time were any vibrations or shifting of the house felt. Also observed was a lounge chair that Marcy was sitting in. Marcia, she pronounced that, was sitting in, moved rapidly backwards and overturned. When officers at the scene tried to move the chair, they did so with great difficulty. So now this is before I got there. Now, you can read the rest of this if you, I know that Robert's recording this and that sort of thing, but when we got there, this is early in the afternoon of Sunday, the 25th of November. One of the first things Ed did, and I don't like to, I was very close to them. I loved them very much, but there were some things that I just wondered about. Ed calls the press. Now, it's ironic, after they threw me out of the seminary for being involved in this in 1977, I ended up a journalist. And the last thing I would do in a case is call the press. First of all, they never get it right. But who did get it right in this case, I read later, was the National Enquirer, the only paper that really was accurate. And so you can knock me over with a feather, but that was actually true. So this is the house. It's very, very tiny. And people today will say, how did all this stuff happen in there? Well, all the more reason to not blame the child for doing it. You have trained observers, such as reporters, television journalists, police officers, all in here, and these things were happening. And they later blamed a 10-year-old kid, which I'll get into in a minute. But these are news photographs, of course, and there were up to 3,000 people outside this house at any one time. So the press had reported. Now here's Marcy. on the right, lovely little girl, and that's her bedroom on the left. That seemed to be a center of the comings and goings of these entities. Now, of course, our assumption was that these were demons. Okay, that was our background. That was our assumption. The Warrens, throughout their career, would attribute a lot of these things to demonic activity. But again, with my weird kind of questioning, canted point of view, I questioned that in the sense that, is there something more to this? Because when I walked into that house, and there was, first of all, there was cat. The place was a mess. The thing, as Laura Gooden called it, the mother of the family, had taken the child's baby carriage and filled it full of clothes from various drawers and wheeled it around the house. Of course, they couldn't see it doing it. They could see the carriage moving, but that was it. The Mrs. Gooden had had her toe broken by a falling television set, one that later hit me the following night. And that was, it was just chaos. There were reporters and police officers coming and going. And so that's why this is considered probably the best documented poltergeist case in the 20th century, if not in history. So that's Marcy's bedroom on the left. I felt from the minute I walked into this place that there were 4 entities. I assumed they were demons too, but I later I think I got an education about they might have been something else. Now, one of the most bizarre things that happened here in this case was the story of the talking cat. And there supposedly was a police officer or two who heard the cat talking. Cat's name was Sam, kind of looked like this, although there was only one. And it's, I don't know, I wasn't born yesterday. It seemed to me that Marcy would hold the cat close to her and sort of throw her voice. Now, my job in this case was to keep an eye on Marcy. Ed asked me to keep an eye on Marcy, make sure she wasn't doing any of these things herself. And the first time I met her, she had the cat, and she said the cat was her best friend. Now, as it turned out, she had been in this house for 6 weeks. The parents had not even let her go outside after having been what today we would call bullied at school. They were way overprotective. She resented it. And there were all sorts of family dynamics here that you can look at it and say might have contributed to a poltergeist case. So at one point, I must say, one of the weirdest things I've ever seen is reporters, and this being near New York City, CBS, NBC, and ABC television networks sent reporters. And today you have the cable news stations and all, but then you just had those big 3 networks. And the strangest thing I think I've ever seen in this case was the reporters standing around holding a microphone up to the cat, begging it to say something. So there you go. That's our media for it. So here are the main events that had occurred while I was involved in the better part of 3 days at sort of the height of this case. Now, if you can see down sort of on the lower right, Marcia's bedroom, the first thing that happened while I was there, after at least the refrigerator floated in the presence of the police and firefighters and myself, there was a flying dresser that sort of just flew across her room. The thing was huge and hit the opposite wall. And then the TV again ending up on the bed several times. On Sunday night, I was standing there, and I think I have a picture of this. That's Marcy in the lounge chair that Officer Tomek was describing in his report. And here is the kitchen, and that television is the one that flipped over and gave me a nice gash in the leg. Now, fortunately, all that junk wasn't on top of it. There were only those flowers here. And I was standing there with Marcy. That's Marcy on the left. I was closest to the television set, sort of leaning up against that counter. And the flowers started to move. And I put my hand behind it. It was very cold, but of course there's a window and it was November. And all of a sudden, over it went. That thing smashed that floor so hard. I can't imagine why it wasn't in smithereens, that glass picture tube, but it wasn't. And that was in the presence of everyone who was in the house at the time. Now, if we look, that's Sunday night, and we look toward, here's the recliner incident. in the tub in the bathroom, things were constantly falling off shelves into the bathtub. We'd put them back on the shelves and they'd fall back in. Friday night and Monday night, this is probably the most dramatic event that I experienced in the house. And the Warrens were off doing some television interview. And I was there, I was kind of in charge. And there was Marcy and I were in the corner playing Monopoly, which for some reason was her favorite game. It's not bad for a 10-year-old. And the Mr. and Mrs. Gooden, Jerry and Laura, and there was John Sopko from the Bridgeport Post and reporter, and there was a neighbor. And at one point, these things, I said the four entities that I felt had started to kind of manifest themselves. You could feel the presence in the kitchen. You could feel a very heaviness and electricity in the air. And then it kind of backed off and then it started again. You could see in the kitchen here, and I'll move on to the next. Here, you can see in the kitchen almost a gauzy cloud. And before I get to that, I forgot the burn on Lorraine Warren's hand. That's Sunday night again, and we were in the kitchen. And this is actually recorded on tape, and because Ed happened to be doing an interview with a local radio personality, and there was a police officer there. Lorraine and I were sitting at the table, and all of a sudden a burn, she went, ooh, and a burn appeared on her hand, and it was a second-degree burn because you could see a blister forming. And in this recording I'm about to play, you can hear my youthful voice saying there's a blister forming. So the first voice you'll hear is Mr. Gooden.
Juggling back and forth. Maybe the one over there. When they at 4:00, the fire department came in. Some of the members of the fire department came in. That TV fell over before this one here. The one in the front room. Remember the one that we had left on the floor, standing up? She just went right by herself. Nobody touched it. Nobody was around it. In fact, they were surprised because they were all here in the hallway looking at the damage as it was happening. Right. And as they were coming in the hall, this thing started dancing. And then that did a flip. So and they didn't believe it, and I didn't believe it. And then we had one questionable officer. He said, it can't happen. Somebody's got a trick to it, but there's no trick. And the others, Mr. Holsworth just chased them out of here. He says, you don't belong here. He says, we don't believe it either, but it's happening. And we got to believe our eyes. It can't be happening, but it's happening. It's happening. We can't believe our eyes. And that carriage over there, you see in the front room, that carriage is exactly the way it was. I was moving around and twisting around and falling, and then the desk took a walk again and went over the school books and everything she had on her desk, fell back into things like that. And that's what's been happening till about, I don't know what time it came over here, 7:30 or so, and that's as far as I know. As far as I'm concerned, I don't know. It's a mystery. I've been blessed in the place. I've been using holy water. Father blessed the water, and I threw it around here, and I've been nominate Papa's and pretty spiritus scientist, amen, for since you left. The story. And now here's another thing. Every time this thing comes, whatever room I go into, I get that ozone smell. Like if you were working in where generators. You ever work in a factory or go by a UI or somewhere where there was a lot of generation, power generation, and you get that feeling where in your head. That's the way, and it feels like it comes right down here. You can feel it right here, the power pushing, compression. You feel it. I feel it in your shoulders. You feel it in your arms. In fact, I feel it now. It's here. And with ice, it's pressed. It's pressure. Just like you got high blood pressure at about 250, which I had here about a year ago. Your smell smells almost similar to ozone. I don't know what ozone is.
Your fuse or things like
that. That's some of it, but that's because you got light.
That's no one like you.
That's ozone. Yeah. I just wanted to ask you, Terry, you were here when the movement of objects occurred. Could you tell me your full name?
Yeah, Terry Wazinski.
All right. Now, Terry, you were here and you had seen some of the objects move. What happened?
I was, like when I was talking to them in the front room, talking to his wife, and the little girl was sitting in the chair at the end. She was in the middle chair, and her girlfriend was next to her. And the little girl was sitting with her feet up, Indian style. And that chair would fly. And her mother pulled it down. It happened about 5 times. So I have to have the little girl down the chair, and so that she wouldn't be hurt or anything. And then it ceased. So I was talking to Jerry, and I was coming to the wall, and he was standing here, and I'm talking to him. And he goes, now, Dan, look at this. And then I heard it. And as I heard it, looked in the room, and the bureau.
Just a second.
I felt like I got burned.
It looks burnt.
That would be the normal.
Yeah, it is burnt. It is burnt. Lorraine was sitting at the table with us while I was interviewing these people. And suddenly she picked up her hand and said it felt as if she was burned. And a blister did form, just as it would with a regular burn.
Like 2 days
You better get out of this house, Lorraine.
No, I'm all right. I don't even know anybody before.
You see that? It is burnt. You were just talking about the electrical current and
Yeah,
there's a blister forming. Sure. See there?
I don't know. There's just a couple of
It's too cold. This is just happening now. I don't think you better stay in here.
I'm all right, honey. If anything else happens, I'll leave. I understand that. Some people
I don't like this burn on you especially. You're a clairvoyant, don't forget. This burn just formed on her hands. It's like the girl that came to us, the 13-year-old.
Did you get anything?
Has anybody else felt this in the house? I don't know if he's coming up.
All right, so you get the picture what was going on, sort of a complete circus. The burn remained, and we treated it as best we could. And Ed, as you could hear, wanted Lorraine to leave, but she wouldn't do it. So that's the burn. But getting back to the Monday night attack here, this is what happened. As I say, I was in the corner of the living room playing Monopoly with the child, and all of a sudden we could feel the energy in the house pick up, and we smelled, as Mr. Gooden described, the ozone smell. And there were 4 entities that are very strange looking in this diagram. However, this is what they felt like, and I'll explain that in a second. 4 of them came out of her room. We could see all these kind of gauzy structures. Mr. Gooden went into the kitchen and started chanting in a beautiful bass voice that I think was his. People have said that I said it wasn't, but I don't know. He just, it sounded like a funeral mass, actually. And he was moving through this fog and chanting like this. And I later asked him, what, the guy worked in a factory. He's a salt of the earth kind of fella. He said, well, he always wanted to be a priest and he was an altar boy. But, I studied Latin for 5 years, and I don't think I spoke it as well as he did. So that's a mystery that we never really solved. So after we have these things coming in, one of them went over here. One of them came and stood right in front of me. I put Marcy behind me because I knew it was after her. And there were just, this was really strange because I instinctively pushed against it. I had been reading a prayer in praise of Christ because once this energy began, we stopped the Monopoly and started to pray. And this thing pushed back as if it had a body. Now, I'll tell you, folks, one of the scariest things is not necessarily the phenomena that occur in these situations, but the situations that smash your belief system. Because all we have is our belief system. And this really smashed mine. These were supposed to be demons, which by definition are spirits, which by definition are non-corporeal. They don't have bodies. But this thing had a body that we could barely see. And it felt almost bird-like, kind of like this. And that really started a process by which I learned the hard way that you do not become annoyed, fearful, or angry in the face of these things, because they are parasites. They're parasitical entities. So when I pushed against this thing, it pushed back. I was so flustered, it got around me and threw Marcy across the room. And at that point, I pulled everybody out of the house. It felt like the place was going to explode. Now, as I said, the Warrens weren't there. And fortunately, the police had blocked off the street at both ends, that block on Lindley Street. And we didn't walk out into the middle of a crowd. That would have been catastrophic, because they were all expecting Father Bill Charbonneau, or who wasn't there at this time either, or me to come flying out the window like the priest in The Exorcist did. That had only been released the previous December. So everybody's thinking about this stuff. So again, these are the days before cell phones. I had to go to a house next door to use the phone to call the Warrens to ask them to come back into the city, because I couldn't handle this. And it was an hour for them to drive 10 miles from their house to get back here. So and by that time, everything had calmed down. As a matter of fact, we'd left the radio on when we left the house. And we walked back in, they were speculating about why we had left the house. So that was interesting. Now, here's the book I was using after the Monopoly game when the things attacked. Now, there's an interesting bit of urban folklore has come up around this little book. And I still have this book. This is an a Russian Orthodox, to be specific, excuse me, prayer book that is used in various prayers and liturgical settings, that sort of thing. And on one side is English, the other side, it's an old book. The other side is Church Slavonic, which is written in the Cyrillic alphabet, looks very strange. And some reporter or some well-meaning police officer happened to see this, because I had, the Marcy would carry it around too. Look at it, I'd say, aha, there's a funny cross on the front. It must be Hindu occult stuff. And the little girl was really into the occult, was carrying this book around. So that got carried down through the decades as a story, and the book actually belonged to me, and it was nothing occult about it. So that's what happens. Now, after the case wound down, after we were thrown out of it, which I'll get to in a bit, the fellows from the Spiritual Frontiers Fellowship, including Boyce Beatty, who was worked at an insurance company in Hartford, but did this on the side, interviewed all the witnesses he could find. So that when Bill Hall went to research this case, he actually was able to hear the recordings such as you just heard, and also the interviews that he did with me and many of the other witnesses. So I didn't know those still existed, but he tied into those for his book. And here's the book, The World's Most Haunted House, by William J. Hall, published by New Page. And it's a lot of stuff, I was there and I learned stuff from this book that I hadn't known. And here's what the house looks like today. All right, that's the one on the left, and it's just very sort of nondescript, and there's generally a no trespassing sign in front. The Goodens, after we left, within a few months, a for sale sign went up in front of the house. And what happened was this: we got through that on Monday, and on Tuesday, we had to get something to eat and just get some rest. So we left the house before noon, and I was going to drive the 60 miles to my family home in East Hartford. And we were begged by Marcy and her mother, who hugged us, said, make sure you come back. Marcy had really kind of gotten attached to me, and she said, promise you'll come back. So the Warrens and I said we'd be back by 2 p.m. And because they had to go do a few things too. So off we went, and I was back there at 2 p.m. And Mrs. Gooden came out and took one look at me and told the police officer to throw me off the property. So I said, how, what? But I had heard, I turned on the New York radio station on the way back in the car, and I had heard that the police had declared the whole thing a hoax. And so I was totally confused. I was like, what on earth is this? And apparently, as soon as we left, the police superintendent Walsh had determined that the city was tied up in knots with the traffic. This was just getting worse. It had to stop. And the police went in and they laid the law down and said, the kid did it. That's what you're going to say. All right. Now, despite the legal question marks here for their right to do that, they did it. And so by the time I went back to the Warrens' house after I'd been thrown off the property there, and they expected me, and they filled me in on what had been happening. So Ed and I were on the radio for a couple of nights after that, mostly the Tiny Markle show in Bridgeport, battling back and forth with the police about this case. The family was, as we heard it, taken to the Fairfield Hills Hospital, state hospital, which now mercifully is closed. And Marcy was subjected to all sorts of psychological tests, and supposedly things happened there at the hospital. Now, I have personal experience of that sort of thing because I was working the previous year with an exorcist in the Diocese of Augsburg, New York, at the St. Lawrence State Hospital, and that's exactly what we would be dealing with in that situation. So that's very plausible. Supposedly, Mr. Gooden had to sink their Christmas tree in concrete that year because Christmas was only a month away, and because it kept floating away. All right. So then a sign appeared, a for sale sign within the next few months, and they did manage to sell the place. It's very sad, though, that everybody sort of had a sad ending here. The Goodens were didn't last many years after that. Marcy herself translated or died, as we say, in 2014, just before this book came out. And she had gone back to Canada and had rather a sad life. And I find that when people are involved in these things, when they're at the center of these poltergeist situations, it very often, they have to be very, very strong to overcome it. Very often it will affect their lives. And certainly it makes you question your belief systems, as I say. It smashes everything you think you know about reality. It takes away any sense of control that you think you might have over your own life in some cases. So there are often very sad endings to these things. Today, the case has come up for a lot of attention. There is talk of a feature film, and here was the Ben and I, my son and I, in the released just about a year ago. It was the debut of the Shock Docs series on the Travel Channel, and this one was the true story of Ed and Lorraine Warren, as you can see there. And this, we were told by a producer, had the largest viewership of any show ever aired by the Travel Channel. So if that impresses you, I guess it's pretty impressive. So I had some issues. Many of you may have seen that. It's still being aired off and on. And that 1.4 million viewer number was just for the first airing of this in September of 2020. I had some issues with the title. Now, after I got thrown out of the seminary, as I say, I ended up a journalist. And I was rather, if they'd called this a tribute to Ed and Lorraine Warren, fine, I would have had no problem. But the true story, I mean, there was a lot of controversy surrounding them. And, and we broke up, as if you want to say that, in 1978. Now, again, I was very close to them. I loved them very much. I had lost my father at the age of 7, and Ed was like a father to me. And but he didn't like to be disagreed with. So we disagreed on a case, and most of us don't like to be disagreed with. So I mean, I get that. And also, my theories were really moving away from their theories. I mean, they kind of stuck with the demon thing, and I was more into the parasite, multiple worlds, quantum mechanics thing, because what I was seeing in these cases that brought remarkable results as opposed to the old 19th century spiritualist ideas. So that was essentially what I was, where I was. And so in 1978, we got together at our favorite ice cream place, Ed and I did, and we shook hands, and then we just parted ways. So it was friendly, and I will always love and respect them. But people should bear in mind that I was involved with them very early on. They were not really that famous yet. Bridgeport helped to make them so, but they were not that well known outside of the Northeast, and mostly they were well known in Connecticut. So anything that happened after that, I wasn't privy to, and there are many people who worked with them later and could tell you more. But that's the story as far as I'm concerned. So just briefly, I want to wrap up here so we can have time for questions. But we call this the baddest poltergeist in New England. This was worse than the Bridgeport case. It was 1979 in New Haven, Connecticut, not that far from Bridgeport. But I did not call in the press, so it might have been bigger than that. But I couldn't do that to the people who were involved. So This is I took hundreds of photographs. This is the only one that came out. This was an apartment over a store that the family who lived in the apartment, they owned the building. They had run a convenience store underneath, sort of this apartment. And when soda bottles started picking themselves up and hitting customers, they thought something really ought to be done. And the woman had, and everybody remembered the Bridgeport case and all the press that it got a few years before. And it was just a woman, a widow, and her daughter who lived in the place, and the woman ran the store. But she she closed the place and told everybody that it was being remodeled. She even got her brother-in-law, who was a remodeler, to park one of his trucks in front so people would think that was really happening. This was the closest case I ever saw to Hollywood. As soon as usually these things need to get used to you when you come in. Seminary classmate, former seminary classmate, I'd already been thrown out, but he was still in the seminary. He called me and said, "You're not going to believe this case." And so down I came, and the two of us kind of worked with this woman. The first time I walked in, I was talking with her. She screamed. I turned around, and there was a huge leather chair the size of a Volkswagen headed straight for my head, and it hit the wall. There was damage to the wall. There was things scrawled on the wall. There were terrible smells. It was worse than Bridgeport. Now, one of the things I was trying out at this point was my multiverse theories. I didn't go with holy water and crosses and this sort of thing. Although the woman had done all the wrong stuff. She had seances and brought in psychic mediums who didn't know what they were doing, and it made things just worse. There turned out to be 6 entities, in my opinion, involved in this. And I got rid of the whole thing by using a joke book. Very strange, not the usual solution I would recommend. However, I got the sense that these things had pretty much almost played themselves out. We needed to bring in some positive energy to cut off the food supply and displace the negative energy. So she had her daughter was living somewhere else. And I had my friend there. The 4 of us had a great dinner, and then we yucked it up all night with this joke book. And the things were never seen or heard from again. And I've always told my 2 sons, Ben and his brother Jonathan, that they need to laugh, but not at each other. Keep it positive. And we find that love really is the solution here. Faith, as long as it's constructive. Now, in the Bridgeport house, the Gooden family had a very negative faith, old-time Roman Catholic faith based on fear rather than love. And that didn't help things. But if you bring in positive energy, positive faith, laughter, a good feeling, tell your people that you love them before it's too late. All these things are good advice for any family. So even if we're full of baloney, these things are good for any family, and it certainly worked in this case. So that was a really crazy one. So these are the things that generally happen. And these are all photos from cases I wasn't involved with, mostly from England. But there are other stories that I've told in my last book that you might be interested in. So instead of, and because exorcism, I should mention it because it is very possible that these things can lead to what is generally known as possession. Had Marcy been untreated in the sense of nobody coming in and trying to bring positive energy or prayer or anything else, and it's possible that possession may have resulted. Now, what is this? This is exorcism, of course, we're talking about here. But what's really happening, in my opinion, is that, and we have to get into sort of the multiverse here. And some of these exorcisms are really dangerous. People have died. And here's the Latin one that we used in Augsburg, New York. I don't think these are demons. One of the clues here that I had, and these are my notes from 1973, so from some cases at the state hospital where I was working with Father Lawrence. And these are people who claim they had seen UFOs and little strange guys, even by their bedsides, even in the hospital. So we have 5 out of 7 people who were eventually the subjects of exorcisms seeing what appear to be aliens and UFOs. And I mentioned this to Father Lawrence, and I said, should we pay attention to this? And he said, he was a very kind and compassionate man, but he said, essentially, these people are in a state hospital, they're inmates, and so they're essentially bonkers anyway, so we should pay attention to this. I wish we had, because I think it's relevant. Because these things in that Bridgeport house the best way I can describe them is alien. Now, I'm not saying they're from some other planet. You know, when you look at the multiverse idea, you know, all possible outcomes existing, and this is good physics to a lot of physicists, then what does it even mean, other planets? Death has no meaning whatsoever. These things were hungry, they were hostile, and completely other. Alien. That's the best word I can use. And that gets it, that's a whole different thing there. But, and again, these are all, we've worked out about 9 different species of these things that we being my son Ben and I since the late 70s, since I started looking at it differently than the Warrens did. They can have gender. I think, as I mentioned early on, the actual objects being moved, things of this kind, maybe they're actually not doing this. Maybe it's the conditions the multiversal conditions, as it were, that would allow these things to happen, as opposed to the entities actually doing it. For example, in that kitchen, when I saw that refrigerator float, that was, I didn't feel any presence there. It could have been, and Ben and I have had to invent terms just to talk about this stuff. The term overwash, as we call it, multiple worlds with different laws of physics. And again, this is good physics to many physicists, overwashing one another. And maybe for a while that refrigerator was in a position of being weightless in a world with different laws of physics. I mean, it's the first day of school here, kids. So again, these are all things that I think we're looking at when it comes to this. Species, the upper echelon, the wise, not wise in any way that's good for us. You've got entities that seem to be very wise in the ways of getting food out of us. They tend to work alone. Elders, farmers who will literally farm families at times for generations. Pack hunters, rogues, passives, the lost who seem to be alone. And the lower you get on the totem pole here, the more they reflect a fascinating characteristic of parasites that we find, that the longer they spend in our world or attached to one of us or attached to a whole human host, the more they tend to forget their own origins. We worked with a very well-known artist in New York City. I'm not going to tell you the name because you know who it is, who had one of these things for 25 years or more, throwing the person down the stairs, doing all sorts of things of this kind. It was afraid to separate from this person because it didn't know where to go or how it was going to eat. So that's again another lecture, perhaps. Multiverse. Physicists have compared it with a space-time foam, where you have worlds like bubbles in a sink, blending, popping sometimes, interacting like this, touching at certain points, intersecting, overwashing, that sort of thing. Again, first day of school. This is just the ways we see parasites. Again, pass-throughs, farmers, poltergeists, obsessors, and possessors. We think it's the same entities who do these things. And so here we are. Nothing is what it appears to be. Everything you know is wrong. And the first day of school, it certainly is. So that's about as far as we can go with this right now. And any questions, we'd be very happy to take them. And a little bit of shameless self-promotion, if I can be permitted here. Here are the books. The upper left there, Behind the Paranormal, that's the book that has this Bridgeport story in it, along with the Village of Voices case as well. The second one there on the left on the bottom is my most recent one. That's got a lot of things. I hated writing this. It's got a lot of things I didn't want to write about, but you get to a certain age, you really don't care what people think. So there's that. And Uneasy Skies, Behind the Paranormal 3, coming out next year. That'll be about UFOs. And of course, the upper one there is about cryptids. We also investigate flap areas. That's our specialty. Areas where you have various types of paranormal phenomena that are not traditionally associated with one another, but we believe are. And so I have actually had a Bigfoot experience or two and a lot of strange lights, things of that kind. So again, that's for another day. Here are some older books, probably nothing of any interest to this audience. Rhode Island and Genial History. It's used in a couple of school districts, much to my surprise, because it's not politically correct. And some of the older books are there too. And our radio show, which anybody can listen to, Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. And that's my son and I there, looking rather I don't know what, outdoorsy. And it's on 1240 AM, 99.5 FM in Boston, Worcester, Providence. If you can't get it, you can go to the website. It's also at tunein.com. Paranormal Radio app also carries it live, and it's noon on Sundays in our time zone. So there we have it. And
So
thank
Paul,
you all.
Paul, wonderful job. Thank you so much. We do have a few questions. Tracy would like to know, have you ever had anything attached to you as a result of your investigations?
Good question, because I get this all the time from people who have taken it upon themselves to become, well, we refer to them as feral ghost hunters. They're people who really, you shouldn't seek this thing out. If it comes to you, that's one thing. But I think I could say partially, yes. I've always tried to surround myself with positive energy. One of the things I learned from Ed and Lorraine Warren was the light thing. You picture yourself at your home surrounded in a bright white light. That really does seem to work. I have had things that have seemingly wanted to come with me, but could not cross over water, things of that kind. Right after the Bridgeport case, it was 1975, I had a case of a poltergeist in Bristol, Connecticut. And this is where I first started to learn that they don't just affect one house. They can affect an entire area. And when Bill Hall interviewed me for his book on the Bridgeport case, I said, look, if you can, go back and check the Mutual UFO Network reports for that period. You're going to find that there were heightened UFO sightings. And sure enough, he found not only that, but he found that other houses in the area had things happening. And Ed Warren actually had a term for that, bleed-throughs. And I went much farther with that later on with some of my theories, but it's never just one house or one family, it's one thing. So it's a larger area. So coming back, I've often had things, but I've kind of, they sort of fade away before they get to my house. And my house is very peaceful, although we live on a very weird hill, Woonsocket Hill in Rhode Island, which has a lot of strange stories, a lot of UFO sightings and things of that kind. But in our home, it's very, very peaceful. So I would say they've tried, but have not been successful.
So Joseph says, I love the idea of replacing the Bible with a joke book. Might that work in an exorcism? You touched on possession, but not demons. What do you think it might be?
Okay, well, the term demons has a lot of theological baggage. It implies a lot of things, and that's why we prefer the term parasite. We think they're part of nature. We don't think they have any theological agenda, but they do fill the bill when it comes to our understanding of demons. They are not good for us. As I say, they're hungry, they're hostile. And I'm not replacing the Bible with a joke book, but you don't go into a Muslim home or a Hindu home. And America right now is very, very diverse. Not everybody's a Christian. You can't go in with that kind of thing. And that in itself, crosses and holy water, that sort of thing, that really has power because it evokes your multiversal awareness and your power to take care of yourself. Because there's never a point, not in exorcisms, not in anything else I've seen, where people are totally controlled. There's always some sort of cooperation going on, which is rather disconcerting. But I think that there's and these things can push your buttons and torture you in a way. I've heard terrible things going on and seen them. But I don't think these things are demons in the classical sense. I think they're parasites. They're part of nature. They're mimics. They will pretend to be your loved ones. And I'm not saying that all ghost experiences are demonic. No, I don't believe that, because I think most of them are multiversal. You're seeing across a membrane, that's actually a term from physics, into a world where, say, the person never died, and that sort of thing. So again, that's a large subject. It's a big kind of thing. But the joke book, I've never done that before or since. It was Brother Juniper, because somebody actually asked what was a joke book. Which were a lot of cute one-liners and cute cartoons that we thought were really funny. And it brought in enough positive energy to end the thing, apparently, once and for all. I stayed in touch with them for years and everything was fine. So I think you have to act according to what you have and according to the people you're dealing with. And you have to use your judgment and your experience. So I wouldn't ordinarily do that, but that was just one experience. And it was the worst case I ever dealt with.
So, Paul, I know you just touched on it, but we did have a few questions on parasites. And so maybe not to be redundant, but maybe take a minute and just address these questions directly. Nancy says, what does Paul mean by the entities eat? And Rick says, what do you mean by hungry?
Oh, okay. Well, good questions. There are parasites that what they all do is they seem to be multiversal creatures. I don't think they're native to our part of the multiverse, if you will. They seem to respond to different laws of physics and can move about through the membranes of parallel worlds. And again, this is all, as I say, it's weird physics, but it's accepted by the likes of distinguished physicists who've been on our show. And they appear to move from world to world in order to eat. Again, I literally eat, not us, I hope, not so far, but the energy that we put out there, energy parasites. Now, this is becoming more and more prominent in the paranormal world. A lot of people are realizing that the old 19th century spiritual ideas of dead people are not good enough to explain the kinds of paranormal phenomena that have been happening all along. So I think that again, I think they're eating our negative energy. Now I can't put a finger on that scientifically in any way, but when we bring in positive energy that unites, they are repelled. The food supply is cut off, and when we have division, and when we have negativity, that's what they feed about. And of course, it's not much of a jump to look at the situation in our country right now, where there are several sides in the political thing, but politics has become a religion, and one side looks at the other not only as wrong but as evil. This is extraordinarily dangerous, as I think we're all seeing. And the question has arisen: parasites can affect families and individuals. What effect could they have in the halls of government? If you look at cases such as the Bell Witch case of 1817 to 1821. It began to affect an entire county in Tennessee. This thing or these things would go around, and I was asked to consult on a film, The American Haunting, with Sissy Spacek and Donald Sutherland, years ago, and I saw some of the primary documents on this, and had this not been a Protestant community in the 19th century, these things might literally have taken over, and I think they did, pretending to be gods in the old world. I think that you can still see some of these very negative, parasitical type religions. And I think these things have had a major influence on human history. So, I mean, this really gets into some pretty wide areas here, but I think that the parasites are feeding. As I think of the power of war and the buttons they can push to cause. I'm not saying the devil made us do it, and all these things. People are responsible for their own actions, and we're responsible for our own governments and countries. But these things can have a tremendous influence. It's really, really petrifying, I think.
So we're winding down here. Final question of the night goes to Teresa, who asks, is poltergeists a common occurrence? Are there many current cases that you're aware of?
Well, it's difficult to tell, Teresa, because how many people will not report these things? People are very often too frightened. They're afraid. In the old days, they'd be afraid of ridicule. Now they're afraid of the press, and all of a sudden some TV show will descend upon them, and they don't want to be known for that. Also, so there's still a certain amount of fear, but I think there are far more cases that are being reported. We currently have 3, but it's difficult because we don't make any money from this. I'm still a working journalist at my advanced age, and Ben and I can't jump on our Gulf Stream and go zipping off to New Zealand or somewhere. So we do the best we can at long distance, particularly with the COVID lockdowns over the past year and a half. You really couldn't do a lot of in-person stuff. But I think it's quite common. I think people may not even recognize it at times because they might have other explanations for it. They just ignore it or whatever. Possessions, supposedly, which can proceed if this thing is not treated from poltergeist cases. Supposedly the Vatican is training more exorcists and all this stuff. Now, I had connections at the Vatican. I even knew a priest who worked in the secret archives, believe it or not, there really is such a thing. And, but like they're going to tell me what's going on. There was one major conference on this, and I think it got escalated, but I think, in the press, but I think that there are more cases than we realize. And who are you going to call? I mean, there are an awful lot of self-appointed people out there who have no idea what they're doing and are going to make it worse. So it's really a terrible situation. But the ones we hear about, we try to deal with as best we can. And I think there are more than we know about.
Great. So, Paul, do you have any last words before we wrap up?
Well, I don't know if you want to put it that way, Robert, but I would just say, in the end, out there in the multiverse, I think we have more friends or more neutrals than we have parasites. I think that all you do is you keep your life positive, you love your family, you stick together, nothing can hurt you. These things fly when there's positive energy. So that's all I would say. Simple advice, good advice for anyone. And let's do it. Let's start doing it in our country too.
A nice message to end on. So I want to thank Paul so much for his presentation. I want to thank all of you for joining us here tonight. Just a reminder to fill out that survey that I email you all tomorrow morning. And just to note that this is the third in a 12-part series of paranormal programs that we're hosting this fall. So pretty much every Friday night and Saturday morning through Halloween, we'll be holding something paranormal or paranormal adjacent. So definitely check out our online calendar of events at www.tewksburypl.org to learn more. So thank you, Gail, Wendy, and Tracy for the kind remarks. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their evening. Thanks so much, Paul.
Thank you, Robert. Good night,
Have
everybody.
a good night.